Good evening. My name is Mike Haney, and welcome to another edition of 60 Minutes in Black America. Please stay with us for this compelling conversation about the continent of Africa, as well as give you an update on the elections in the United States of America. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Good evening. My name is Mike Haney, and welcome back to another edition of 60 Minutes in Black America. And I've got to tell you the excitement and enthusiasm I have for our guest, who you'll meet later, Maxwell Edusei, as we talk about Africa, Africa's relationship with the United States, Africa's relationship with the world. But let's talk this for a minute about the elections in the United States this week, as we've done two specials this week on the elections. And I'd like to thank all of you, each of you, for watching our special last week with Beverly Cooper Wheely and as well as Bob DeShield. We also had Beatrice Muckle on the show as representatives, and Rhonda Wimbish. Let's not forget Rhonda, as we talked about elections across the country and what was thought to be an election that would be for the ages. The votership for this midterm was higher than we had ever seen in this country in recent memory, because people realized the importance. And I think what people were saying a message to was the tone of our country. And it was great to see people vote conscious and people realize that democracy was important to this country. So just an update on what's going on in the House and the Senate. The Senate now will remain in control of the Democratic Party after the recent victory by Catherine Masto in Nevada, which gave the Democrats a 50-49 majority. Still to be left to decide is the Walker-Warnock U.S. Senate race in Georgia, which will go to a runoff on December 6th, I believe, of this year. Herschel Walker, the Republican, and Raphael Warnock, the incumbent Democratic U.S. Senator, will face a runoff to decide whether the Democrats get a true two-person lead of the U.S. Senate. In the House, currently the Republicans have a 211 to 203 lead in the House of Representatives, which with a majority of the states of Arizona, California, Colorado, Maine, Oregon, and New York still deciding their representative races to determine just how large a majority the Republicans would gain. But it's nowhere near what the Republicans, and they've said it, expected out of the race, which was to get a supermajority or over 40. And it just goes to the mindset of the country at this point of rejecting insurrection and rejecting anti-democracy language. And hopefully our country is a better country, a stronger country, with the people making the decision that we don't go along with people that contest democracy. Today's conversation is one that I have been looking forward to getting involved in. And as a prefix to this conversation, I don't go to the movies often, but I happened to go to see the movie Wakanda. And Wakanda was a compelling movie, and I'll do my best not to tell you much about it so I don't spoil those of you that haven't gone. But Wakanda was set in East Africa in terms of the background. It's a fiction movie with a fictional country of Africa where Wakanda as a nation ruled the world. And Wakanda was a country in the world at its time that it was fictionally depicted, that it was charged with ensuring that world order, that world politics was one in which it protected itself, but it also protected others as well. And, understanding the history of the continent of Africa, and that's why Maxwell Edusei today will help us gain that understanding, and the colonization of Africa, the continent, and the 11 million slaves that left Africa mainly for the Caribbean and South America is one in which, as a country, we have to understand. We have to understand what colonization is, what colonization means, particularly to Caribbean countries with people on those islands that look like us, and how colonization has held back us as a people for a number of years. And when the Queen died recently, and rest her soul, many of us looked at that as a moment of reflection when we realized that Great Britain colonized more countries in this world, or more territories in this world, than any other country, even though the country that we're talking about today, Ghana, was colonized by Portugal. And the reason that many of these countries, Portugal, Spain, Great Britain, Germany, the Dutch, colonized is for political gains, for resources, particularly the resources and minerals over in Africa, and for religious reasons is to take advantage of the people and take advantage of the land. And we wonder, as we talk about world politics and world order today in the United States, we talk about Ukraine continuously, we talk about China continuously, we always hear about North Korea and Russia. Why isn't the continent of Africa or the African countries always any time part of those conversations as a continent of importance, one that has 1.4 billion people, has the two top gold producing countries on its continent, in addition to a multitude of other resources? So today's conversation we will shape around the relevance of Africa as a continent to the world, and why Africa and the knowledge of Africa should be significant to us as a people. So as we run to the theaters to see and check out Wakanda, which is a fictional story of a fictional country, that we hope that we become engaged, excited, and knowledgeable about the continent of Africa, which I am fairly certain, if you're an African American, for instance, that your ancestry came from the continent. And before we bring Maxwell in, let's continue with this wonderful clip of this African dance that was taken by me in Uganda just over a year ago. Wow, that's a beautiful, beautiful dance. And let's bring Maxwell Edusei in to the studio now. Maxwell, how you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing
Good to
very
see you.
well.
Good to
Yourself?
see you, Maxwell. I'm doing fantastic, and thank you so much for joining us tonight on 60 Minutes in Black America. And if I can say to the viewers first, if you watched us over a year ago when we had our inaugural show, Maxwell was our very first guest. So, Maxwell, it is good to have you back here over 15 months later. And at that point, when we brought you in, we felt it was important to begin to educate people about history and heritage. And that is a subject that we have to continue to implore that people understand. In addition to understanding that, as we begin to look and travel, that perhaps that should be maybe our first destination. So welcome back, Maxwell. And what have you been doing?
Oh, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me back, and my greetings to your audience. Yes, I've been actually one of the uh, interesting moment that I had not too long ago was to take the president of Howard University and the provost to Ghana and to meet the Ghana president. So, yes, I see the picture. Yeah, the president is in the middle, and then we have the um, president of Howard University, and then the minister for tourism in the picture. And I'm the one with the red tie right there. Okay. So that was very interesting. And from there, we went on to Senegal and trying to have synergy between the countries with Howard University. And it was very, very successful. It was very, very successful trip,
Well, that is
especially.
great, Maxwell. That is great.
Yeah.
So that's President Wayne Frederick of, is that
Yes.
President Frederick of Howard University? And so,
Yes.
so, so, what was the significance? Why did the president of Howard University feel it was important for him to travel across the Atlantic Ocean to go to Africa, to go specifically to Ghana and Senegal?
It's all about re-educating ourselves about where we came from and the continent, and also trying to have, apart from the dialogue of what transpired through the slave trade and the cultures and the history, we were also trying to get some universities in Africa to um, cooperate in different areas in the academia.
So Maxwell, let's play this clip because as I mentioned before, when we brought you on over 15 months ago, it was our goal to educate our viewers on history and heritage, and we continue that mission today. Because if we don't understand where we came from, how do we understand where we're going? You made this comment about that in terms of the understanding of Africa by Americans. And let's play that comment. Let's play this comment that you made about Americans a bit ago.
Okay, you remember when after school we all moved to New York and then worked a little bit on Wall Street and the market crashed. Then I decided to do my own business. So once I was talking to people about Africa, I realized that they didn't know anything about Africa. The things that they were telling me, I'm like, no, this is out of this world. This is not in Africa. So I decided to form a tour company to bring people here to see it for themselves because you can't tell them anything. You can't convince them.
Mostly
Okay?
African Americans, right?
African Americans and some whites.
So, okay.
So that's powerful and it is compelling, and additionally, it's sad. And I'll tell you, viewers, before you run off to the movie theater, to go see Wakanda, and we want you to support that movie. Okay, let's hang around a bit so we can learn some realness about our history and heritage as African American people. So, what compelled you to make that statement, Maxwell, that we don't know about Africa and the misnomers? And what were some of the misnomers that you heard in terms of the statements made about Africa? But what made you make that statement that African Americans, particularly, don't know anything about Africa?
Yes, the way that we've been miseducated in Africa, that was the same way that most African Americans didn't know much about their heritage. Because even in Africa right now, some people don't even know that African Americans came from Africa. And they think, like some of African Americans always complain about them being called Obroni when they go to Ghana. Obroni means white man, but the real meaning means a foreigner, from overseas. Obroni in the Akan language. Okay, so sometimes the African Americans get offended being called white, but it's it's because they think they are more, they see them more as foreigners, not in terms of color. Because for me, when before I came to Ghana, to the US, I didn't know I was black, because everybody in Ghana was black. Nobody called me black. I didn't know the word even existed till I came to the US. And in those days, it wasn't African American, it was Black American. Okay. So the education that were actually orchestrated by the Europeans were the ones that have really miseducated us and don't know much about each other. So most of the time, when I take a group there and we go to some of the villages where, education is not that high, but all the curriculum was orchestrated and planned by Europeans when during colonization. So over the years, we study more of Europeans than Africans. We never study about ourselves, so we don't know much about ourselves. And
So do you think that this is a tremendous disadvantage for African Americans? And what's the term? As you said, when you came over here, you had never heard the term black, but yet we said and we fought over the fact of whether we should be called African American, whether we should be called Negroes, whether we should be called black, and you came over here, had never heard the term black, coming from a country of 32 million people, right? 32 million or thereabouts.
now, yes.
What, yeah, exactly. So what's the term that would be appropriate from your standpoint to call a person that looks like you in America? African?
African American. To
African
me,
American is the
yes,
appropriate term
it's
from your
appropriate because
perspective.
black is a color. I don't see it to be a race. I mean, it was the division of black and white was
Did you say
recorded.
that you don't see that black is not a race?
Yeah, black is not a race.
Black is not a race.
It's just a color.
It's just a color. And
Yes.
so hear this, people, to what Maxwell was saying from the perspective of people, as he said, when he was in his country that saw us as foreigners, that black is not, is a color. Is black a color?
Yeah. So okay.
What do you think? Is black a color? I mean, I'm asking the viewers to. I've seen a couple of comments. Put some comments in because this is an important
Okay.
conversation just in terms of how we call ourselves. Think about what Maxwell just said compellingly, that we're not black from his perspective. We're African in America. So African America is more the appropriate term. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
And how do the blacks set or the Africans, because you've just helped me, because I'm not using the term black anymore, because it's compelling what you said as a, not an outsider, as someone from where I came, wondering why I'm calling myself black when I'm from Africa. Because I'm from Africa, right? That's where I originated from, right?
Hmm. Yeah. So even I remember Steve Biko was once asked why he was calling himself, he doesn't call himself black or something, and the difference between black and white. And he told the judge, no, you are pink, not white. the way, if you talking about colors and how ones look, we are more brown than black, and the white people are more pink than white. But what happened was, so in South Africa, or sometimes in Africa, some of the revolutionaries, they call the Pan-Africanists, call white people pink, and they call black people brown, just to defute the idea of white supremacy, of differentiating um, a black from white, and black being inferior and white being superior.
Wow.
So
Hey, so
that,
so 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 Maxwell, you've educated me, and I hope the viewers feel educated on the significance of being an African, an American, or an African American. And I got to tell you, based on what you just told me, I will never consider myself black again. I'll consider myself African. Okay?
yeah,
And we talked about the misnomers and some of the misconceptions of African Americans as it relates to their motherland, or from the continent of Africa. Why is that? Why is that? Do you think that we don't understand, or we don't take the time to really get into the history and heritage of from where we came? But yet we'll go to the movies and go see Wakanda.
yeah, because Wakanda actually is pictorial, and so you can see it, and you long to be like that. Something that you wish that's your, you know, um, environment, or that's what you long to be, in a way. Um, I had a word, but I've forgotten what word I was going to use. But it's Wakanda is somehow the way that we as a people will prefer to see ourselves. And because over the years we've been marginalized, we've been told we haven't contributed anything to human civilization.
Wow. So are you saying to me that Wakanda is the way, from your perspective, Wakanda and the depictions in Wakanda is that dream that we want to see ourselves at, that's not really a reality because we've been marginalized by other people. So we look at a movie like that to uplift us? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes, because that's what we long to be, and we can be. It's all started. I mean, nothing in this world just happens. Everything that happens, there's somebody behind it. Everything is caused to happen. So if you take uh, the way the continent is right now, and then the aspirants of Africans all over the world, was orchestrated by Europeans, and it started from, when they first got onto the coast of West Africa, and then started colonizing and seeing all the resources and everything else. And that's when, in 1884, actually, the Europeans were fighting among themselves for control. So it was this guy, Bismarck, who from Germany, who decided, they should have a conference, which was now called the Conference of Berlin, the Berlin Conference in 1884, to partition Africa. There was no African there.
So they had a meeting in Berlin to divide the continent of Africa up among Europeans. Is that what you're saying? And
Yes,
that conference still continues today. It may be called something else, the G7 summit or something of that nature, but they had a
yes.
conference
Hmm.
in Berlin to divide up the continent of Africa.
Yes.
Compelling.
And when even you look at the map, if you take a place like Ghana, Ghana was given to Britain at that time. If you look on the north of Ghana, is Burkina Faso, which is French. And you look to the east of Ghana, is Togoland, Togo, which is French. You look to the left, the west is Ivory Coast, which is French. So if you take, okay, Ivory Coast, next to Ivory Coast is Sierra Leone, which is English, and then to Senegal. So what they did was they made sure the boundaries were drawn that we cannot communicate. So we were taught English, and Togo was taught French, and I can communicate with Togo. And when they drew the lines, they just drew it arbitrarily. So some family will be in Ghana, and other families will be in Togo, like the Ewe, the Ewe ethnic group. Part of them are in Ghana and part in Togo, and they are the same people. If you take even Eastern Africa, the Maasai, the Maasai was a big nation. They were a group of, it was a nation, and it was divided. Half of Maasai are in Tanzania and half in Kenya right now. So they were divided. So the continent was divided in such a way that it got to a point there were conflicts all over, because we have to fight for land. For instance, if Ghana, in the Togo area, the Volta region, we found gold. Someone, a family in Togo, would say, look, our father owned that tract of land, but it's in Ghana right now. So then there will be a border dispute, there will be infighting. So right after that, to be able for the Europeans to control, the Africans were always fighting because of the borders. And when you look through history, Africans' plight is like, it's only diseases and wars and conflicts all over. But it wasn't there before. It was actually created by the Europeans
So
in that area.
it was a conquer and divide mentality where the Europeans aggravated, factions and warring and diseases between countries. And so, do you believe, Maxwell, that this is a mentality? And first of all, why would Europeans look to Africa? Is it because there were dark people who they felt they could take advantage of, and they knew about the vast resources there? Why did Portugal, for instance, invade Ghana? We know it was for a lot of the mineral. Ghana is the largest gold producer on the continent and one of the top gold producers in the world. So, what was the significance of
Okay.
Portugal and Britain coming into Ghana? Why? Why did they decide to come there? Because there were dark people there, Africans, and they didn't respect us because of
No,
how we looked?
no, they got there by mistake. The Portuguese never invaded Ghana or any African nation. What happened was, before all this happened, the Europeans used to get most of their stuff from India, spices, ivory, cotton from India. And when the uh, Ottoman and the wars and the jihad and everything was happening, they wanted a new route to go to um, India instead of going through the normal channels. So it was the Spanish king who commissioned the Portuguese, who were very good at sea, to sail to India. So they decided to go by the Atlantic Ocean. And fortunately, they were blown, fortunately or unfortunately, blown into Gulf of Guinea. And when they landed in Ghana, they landed in a place called Anumanso, which means inexhaustible water. And when they got there, they were amazed about the amount of gold that the people had. And they could tell because of the means of exchange. You can get it for almost nothing.
Gold.
Gold.
The significance of gold, and we took some pictures, got some pictures of people over in Ghana with gold. I mean, it was significant, and gold
Yes.
rules the world. Look at this one person. I mean, gold was
Yes.
like how we treat, just plastic over here in Ghana.
Yeah. So we had a lot of gold. So that's how they named the place El Mina, which means the mines in their language. So today, where they built their trade post, where later on it was turned into a slave dungeon, is called El Mina, because the real name was the El Mana, which in Portuguese means the mines. And we couldn't really the producers, so it corrupted to El Mina. So the biggest castle, slave dungeon, that took more slaves to the Americas is in that place today, which is over 500 years old, called Elmina Castle. I call it Elmina Dungeon. But that's the name in Ghana right now that you can go through there. To me, that's the only thing on earth that tells the true story about slave trade because it's tangible. You can go in there, walk in there, see it, touch it, smell it, and it's there today telling the
Let's talk
story.
about that. Let's talk about slave trade. Let's talk about the fact that 11 million 11 million Africans were exported, right, off of the continent, and they went through Ghana. What was that like for Ghana? And was it to what we heard that Africans were selling Africans as part of the slave, and that's how they got there. And Ghana was closer to the Americans and the Caribbeans, and that's why you had much of the slave trade going through Ghana. What was that like? How did I get here, Maxwell, to the United States?
Well, okay. The Europeans, in my opinion, didn't set out initially that they're going to Africa to enslave. What happened was when they're going to India and they lost their way and got to uh, West Africa and they found that there are more gold and ivory and spices than even in India, they decided to settle. So at that time, it was equal partnership. They had they bring their goods in. In those days, it was a medium of the medium of exchange was barter. So they bring their goods in, and they brought in mostly whiskey and gunpowders and guns and all those stuff in exchange for gold, ivory, spices. So it was equal partnership. I mean, it was a good trade going on. But the slave trade itself started when the Americas were discovered and they needed more people to work on the plantations. That's when it started. Because the
So
first
slavery
European,
started as a result of America being discovered and needing to export labor over to Americas to build out this country that we're in now.
yes, because in before then, the first um, Portuguese who arrived in Ghana was 1471, Vasco da Gama. So those guys, when they came, they were more interested in trading, mostly in gold. So in the 16th century, when they needed people, the merchants came in. They said, "No, we don't need gold right now. We need people." But they didn't tell them that we need to buy people. They use strategies to be able to extract the people. The first group that were taken with the notion that they were going to be trained in uh, English language, so they'll come back as interpreters and also to evangelize, because in those days Christianity was being transported all over the place,
So you're saying that the
evangelize.
first people that left Africa thought that they were going over as free people to be trained? Is that
Yes,
what you're saying? That they didn't know they would be enslaved? That they kind of like what Ron DeSantis did to the people in Texas and sending them up to Massachusetts, promising them some things up there. That's what happened. Ron DeSantis sent a plane to Texas to send Mexicans up to Cape Cod, Massachusetts, with the thoughts of training them. So are you saying that's the same thing that we were tricked in as Africans leaving Africa, coming over to the States?
yes, those are the first group. The second group, the next one that left, that came to Jamestown. Okay, that one,
Jamestown, Virginia.
Virginia. You know, there's a Jamestown in Ghana. It's a castle also in Jamestown in Ghana. So what happened was they built that castle. In those days, when they decided they needed more people, they actually grabbed, because in those days we have indentured um, servants, not slaves. We have, like in those days, you owe somebody. You can let your kid go and work for that person to earn your money back, and the person is freed. We had that kind of servant in Africa. It was there all the time. Like, you owe me, you can pay, you can send your son to work for me on my farm and everything. And when the money is paid, then they are freed. So when they came in and they wanted the people, they realized that some of these people are not relatives. I mean, they are supposed to be working for me, and they're not my relative, though we are all black, we are all Africans, but we're not, relatives. So if the merchants come in and they said, look, we don't want any more gold, we want people, I can give you more money for this. So they gave them the people, the servants that they had. Okay, there were three ways that the slaves were captured. The first one is that the merchants who came in, the Europeans, had superior guns. So they and some of the Africans will go into villages and ransack villages and capture them. Because the Europeans who came in couldn't go to the villages themselves. They didn't know how to. It's the natives who taught them, who directed them where to go, how to go, and all that. So they had African counterparts, business partners, if you put it that way, whereby they go in and ransack a village. Mind you, these were like in the 15th century. So when there's a village in a place where it's ransacked, nobody will know for days or weeks, because there are no radios, no TV, nothing to communicate. So maybe somebody is passing by the village and they will realize there's nobody there, all gone. The other way, which took even more, was that the tribes, inter-tribe wars, the more, in those days, you can buy gun from the Europeans, but with people, because it was a barter system. They don't want to take the gold anymore. They want people. So if you want more guns to defend yourself from the next tribe, you go to the European who has brought in the guns and the gunpowder, and they will say, okay, we'll give you the guns. They go to the next village. When they conquer them, they capture the prisoners of war and take them to the Europeans. And then they get more guns to defend themselves. So that strategy took more than the ones that they even go to the villages and ransack, And then the third one is what I explained earlier, the indentured servants who
So
were.
I sell them, I let them use my son to pay back a debt that's indentured,
Yes,
or the villages, the tribes work. So slavery was a business, it sounds
it was
like,
a
and that's
big
why,
business.
that's what it was, a big business, as big as gold and resources over there. And Africa seemed to be the epicenter for slavery. And so let me ask you, as we look at the world today, because I want to transition into what you're doing today and how many people you take over to Africa for a visit, why you take them over there. Is it possible for us to look at equality having transitioned the way we transition from Africa, from where we come from, anywhere we're at, whether we're in Great Britain, whether we're in the United States, whether we're in Canada? Is it possible for us as Africans to look at being equal in any of these lands having been exported from our motherland?
Yes, because especially if we take all the colonies like United States, Canada, which at that time was a colony for the British. When they started, the indigenous people who should have owned the land didn't own it. So everybody else who came in to help to build have equal access. And that is what it should be. Because the black people who came in, though they came in chains, they helped in building and shaping the nation. So they have a stake in it. And that is what it should be. When it comes to Britain, Britain had natives already. I mean, the indigenous people. So when you come in, it's a different issue. But when we talk about America and Canada, where the indigenous people were decimated and all the new people in today claim to be the majority, they had help from all sorts.
Well, I got to tell you, Maxwell, I think that many people feel as though the colonization and slave mentality as it relates to Portuguese, Spanish, Great Britain has continued to exist even through the 21st century. We know that slavery was predominant between the 19th and 20th century, and it was, huge business, huge business. Free labor. This country was built on free labor, which is why people continue to insist on reparations. And someone asked a question, which we'll get to there earlier. Todd, if you all can pull that question up, but they asked the question, what is the difference between being African and an African descendant? Is there a difference? Are you African
No,
and I'm an African descendant? Is that it? I'm an African
no,
descendant and you're African. What's the difference?
we are all African descendants. We are descended from the African race. So the only difference is either you are on the continent or outside the continent. But we are all Africans descended from one African tribe. And, we go to different places. Like even in Africa itself, like I'm an Ashanti. The Ashantis migrated from the northern part, like around Sudan, and later on settled where we are right now in West Africa. So we are, though I'm on the continent, I'm still an African. If I had gone from Sudan to another place like the Americas, I'm still an African,
So
descended.
are you a as an African, you being an African and me being an African to the point that you made in that clip that we played earlier, your understanding of your history and heritage, how does it affect you over here in the States versus me with an ignorance of history and heritage to who you educate to, right? So how does that give you a different perspective of America as someone that understands your history and heritage than the average African in America that doesn't?
Well, when I came here, okay, I knew my culture. I was trained in the traditions and everything. But then those who have left for a long time don't. Right now, my children were born here. Okay. The African Americans, they don't know much about the African culture, but they know they call themselves Africans, because I don't call myself most Ghanaian. I'm an Ashanti from Africa, because Ghana was actually given to us after 1884. In those days, we were being called Gold Coast.
Gold Coast.
Yes, and later on changed to Ghana from the northern part of Africa. There was a tribe called Ghana, and we think we are the tribe who migrated to the southern part. But the whole thing is about knowing the cultures and the tradition.
Does that make you a different mentality of a person over here in America than me? Like for instance, people use the terminology he has a slave mentality. Is that a correlation between a lack of understanding of history and heritage and where you come from and having been bought into the American system and being continued used? Whereas you come over here from our motherland with a different goal and perspective
Mhm.
of being over here. What is it that you come over here for? What is your perspective of being in America?
Well, I came here to school, but what it is Americans might say, okay, they have slave mentality. The Africans have colonial mentality, because what happened was, for the European to be able to um, take advantage of the resources that we have, they have to divide us and take our heritage from us.
Are
So,
they still doing the same thing today over here in America? So are they still dividing us
oh,
and taking our
it's worse in
resources? What do you
Africa.
think?
It's worse in Africa.
It's
I'm
worse in
telling you.
Africa than it is in America.
Oh, I've lived in both places, and I'm telling you, it's worse in Africa than in America. The slave trade, I mean, the colonial mentality. Look at all our leaders. The leaders, most of our leaders were trained in the West, and they go back and rule like the slave master, like the colonial masters, because that's why the disparity between the rich and the poor is so vast. It's amazing. And some people, even in Africa today, can tell you the next thing to God is the white man.
That's what they believe.
Some of them, I'm not saying everybody. But I'm saying the colonial. I'm trying to explain how deep some of the colonial mentality is. As here, that we have some slave mentality, and but it depends on the individual, what they want, what their aspirations are. They can sell their soul for anything.
So
So,
how about us as a people? How about us as a people with a mentality? And let's go back to the fictional movie Wakanda,
okay.
right? The Wakanda. I don't know if you saw the latest one in which, that was a fictitious country ruled by
Hmm.
Africans, ruled by Africans and was the superpower of the world
Yes.
during its time, fictionally speaking.
Hmm.
And with the resources that we have in Africa, the knowledge we have as a people, the leadership that we are trained to be, you said that you were power so that we're recognized as a people, as others are, as the Ukrainians, the North Koreans, the Russians, and the Europeans. Why aren't we recognized as a people as other countries are? And I think Maxwell's sound is out. And we're talking, this is Mike Haney with 60 Minutes in Black America. If you're
Hello.
watching us on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're watching us on Facebook, please like us on Facebook. We're talking with Maxwell Edusei, the president of African Looms Tour, and we're talking about Africa as a country. And Maxwell has educated us on the fact that when he came over to the United States, he didn't recognize us as black. He recognized us as African American, because there's no such thing. He didn't even understand what black was. And it was compelling in terms of what he was saying and how we arrived here as a part of 11 million people were exported out of Africa as slaves. And Maxwell broke down the three principal ways and causes that people were either indentured or sold by tribes or just harnessed up by European countries and sold. And the initial wave of people from Africa that were brought across the seas came across thinking that they were to be educated, to be trained, to have a job. So they never were initially told that they wouldn't be free. And then the second wave were brought over as slaves. So some information that has come out, and I've read, and I think it's imperative that we read as we look to go and realize fictional stories, that we also go and do research to what Maxwell is educating us today. So Maxwell, you're back.
Yes, I'm sorry. My son
That's
came
okay.
online and he cut it off.
That's okay. And we were talking about the ability for us as a people from a continent, and we have been disrupted. We've been disrupted as a people. We've been disrupted from Africa. I don't know if the Portuguese or the English can say that. I don't know if the Mayans can say it or the Chinese can say it, that they've been disrupted and spread as a result of 11 million, and 11 million that were exported as slaves, indentured slaves, however they were exported, has multiplied into tens of millions since then, to a point when our not only our economy, but our culture and heritage has been disrupted, right? So what do you feel, Maxwell, is the opportunity for us as a people? Because you're here in these States, and you are, and I are the same. You're African, I'm African American. Is that a proper way to identify you and us, you and me? You're African, and I'm African American, or are you African American too?
Right now, I'm an African American because I'm a dual citizen. So, but I see myself as an African. Even before I came to the US, I was a member of the student movement for African unity, and I've never seen myself as a Ghanaian, but an African, but I'm an Ashanti. So I see myself as an Ashanti from Africa instead of a Ghanaian, because to me, we were divided. We were given that name, and we don't have to keep that name. We have to be trying to take away that name,
Wow.
because people keep saying, "Oh, Africa is not a country; it's a continent." Well, before then, it was one mass continent. Before we were divided,
Before we were divided, we were one country.
yes, and one people. It's just that you go to the northern part, the skin gets lighter. You go deep south, it gets lighter. But the same people.
So you're talking about Morocco up to the north, right?
Yes,
Morocco and those countries up there that don't suffer the disparity that in the middle they suffer, in the Sudans and the Kenyans and
Kenya, yes.
Ethiopia and the
Mhm.
Somalia, etc. That part of Africa is seen as a bit different.
Yeah, I mean now, because the northern part, who they call themselves north of Sahara, they became aligned with the Arabs. So they were united with the Arab nations, but they are on the continent, yet they are part of the uh, African Union. So that area is another issue that needs to be talked about, because the divide and conquer also, the lighter you are, the better you think you are.
Is
So
that
we
a
know.
thought or is that a reality to the way that people treat you? In this country, we know that early on in the 20th century, 21st century, and they had, you talk about housemaids and et cetera, the lighter ones were put in the house. And then you had a cross-cultural influence of white slave owners that impregnated black African women. So you had that dynamic of light-skinned, and they were treated as better. But what I'd like to do, because I know our time, I could spend another half hour. I know you've got to go. You've got another meeting, and I want to talk about your business. How many people have you taken over to Africa on tours from this country? We talked earlier that the president of Howard University was with you earlier this year or this fall on a trip over there, a fact-finding trip and a rediscovery trip. But how many people over the years have you taken over to Africa, and why do you take them, and why do they want to go?
Okay, I started in 1994, and by 2007, I've taken 10,000 African Americans.
10,000
And
African Americans you have taken
Americans,
over to Africa.
yes. And it was, in those days, it was mostly churches and schools. So they are more organized, so we can get about, the biggest one that I had actually was 204 people that we took to Ghana, Senegal, and Gambia on one trip. It was a
Wow.
church.
So
Yes.
why do they want to go there? Why do they want to go? They want to, because many people, I had someone just last week said that they wanted to go visit the jungle in Africa. Do they have jungles in Africa, or is it just like Rock Creek Park in DC and Lincoln Park in Baltimore and, the forest
Yeah.
lands out in Colorado? What does a jungle look like in Africa?
I don't know when they mean jungle. Well, we had uh thick forest, like in Africa is so diverse. Like in Southern Africa, where you can go for safari with the lions and everything, there's more savanna. You come to Ghana, it's more rainforest. So the forest is thick. That's where you see your mahoganies and your, you know, ebony wood and all that. It's a thick forest. So in those areas, you can see more of crocodiles and lions. I mean, not lions, the elephants and antelopes and all that. But then you can go to other areas where savanna is so vast. So if a lion is about a mile away, you can, about half a mile away, you can see it. But in Ghana, a lion will be next to you and you will not see it because of the thickness of the forest.
Wow,
Okay.
that is
Then,
powerful. That is powerful, Maxwell. And I know our viewers are asking for you to come back, which I knew. That's why we brought you two times when you came back last year. And it's important that we have this conversation. And we haven't even begun to get to the surface, but I want to honor and respect your time. I want to appreciate you for at least coming on. I don't want to take advantage of you and keep you another 45 minutes. And do we have the website for Maxwell to show that in the event that our viewers are curious about? Because Maxwell, you also sell and deal with and import shea butter, right? Shea butter?
yes, shea butter is like it's becoming the gold of Ghana. We produce a lot of really good shea butter and cocoa butter, which is very good for the skin. And out of that, we do the black soap. So I market those three things: shea butter, black soap, and cocoa butter.
And you also market taking people to Africa. And final question for you, Maxwell, before I give you a minute to tell our viewers the importance of understanding history and heritage, do more women or men go to visit Africa, and why, whatever gender is the majority?
Okay. From our data, it's unfortunately it's only 7% men,
So
and
did you say
93
only 7% or 93% of the
women.
people that you take are females that go to
Yes.
Africa? Only 7% of the men? Why don't the men go? Egos, or they don't want to?
Um, well, it depends. But then I'm taking a group this December for Christmas. Out of the 35 that are going, including me, we are only four men,
For men.
31 women. So that's what we're dealing with right now.
So why is that, Maxwell? Why do women desire to go there more? Are they better prepared financially? Do they understand history and heritage better than men? And I suspect that most of the ones you're taking are African Americans.
Yeah, most majority of them. The schools, when I do different schools, that's when I get different ethnic groups. I mean, races like South Americans and other people, whites. But the churches and the fraternities and sororities mostly all black.
And this is
Um,
the ambassador, right? This is the
yeah,
ambassador, Ambassador Mahama, right? Is that how you pronounce her
yes,
last name? Who's the
Muhammad.
ambassador from Ghana to the U.S. Very intelligent lady. I think she's the first female
Female.
ambassador to the United States, correct?
Yes,
And
yes.
you know her. This is one of your circle over here in the States, right?
Yes, I know her very well because she is interested in doing uh, women um, issues and connecting women from here with women um, in Ghana. That's a passion to you know work together in different areas, especially in business.
Wow.
So
Well,
that's a passion.
Maxwell, I want to honor because I want you to come back and say, Mike, you didn't take advantage of me and you knew I had to go. I want to honor that. And I want to give you a minute, if you would like it, or two, to tell our viewers whatever it is that you have to tell them, particularly as it relates to the importance of visiting Africa and understanding where it is that they come from. You want to recap and let our viewers know what you feel, why you feel it's important for them to understand the importance of a conversation like this.
Okay, one of my main passion is the reunification of the continent and the people of Africa all over the world. So, including the diasporans, it's very important because as a people we've been divided not by ourselves, but by someone. I always say, even if we don't like each other, let's come back together and redivide ourselves on our own terms so that we'll know what we are doing and we know the reasons why we did it. And because without us coming back together, it's going to be really tough for us to be recognized as the people that God has created us to be. um, is very important. And I always take my lessons from the scriptures. Like Joseph, it was necessary for him to reunite with his siblings to be able to inherit God's promise. Because if he had left them and for the famine to kill them, Jesus would not have arrived,
Wow.
would have
Wow.
come in. So through that, they were able to go in as few people into Egypt and came out as a nation to inherit their promise. So the reunification is very important. It's crucial. We still have the resources. They trying to divide us to be able to take over the resources, marginalize us, but I think we are resilient people. And if we are able to come together, the only equation there is the unification. It's very, very important. I say we don't even have to like ourselves, but it's very important we come together as one to inherit our promise on this earth. Because
Wow.
we still have the resources. We still have 95% of platinum of the whole world still in Africa, 60% arable land. I mean, we have vast land. These are arable land that is good for agriculture that we can utilize. So it's a very still endowed with riches. It's just that because of the division and the big among us, we are not able to see our way forward, and we're being taken advantage of.
Well, Maxwell,
So
I
I think we
appreciate it.
should come in. I mean, if for starters, go there, see it for yourself, and make your own determination. But I think if you go, especially to Ghana with me, I'll show you what Africa is. I show Africa the best.
Wow.
So
Well, Maxwell, I appreciate you being here. Maxwell Edusei, African Loom Tours. Look it up, African Loom Tours. Maxwell, thank you so much for being with us today. And to our viewers' desire, we want you to come back so you can further educate us about the year of return in Ghana and many other things. We really want to talk about that gold because I'm ready to go over there. I watched this show called Gold Rush, and I said, well, man, I said, if I go to Ghana, with that, I mean, it is unbelievable the tons of gold that they have over there and the vast and richness of this country. And to your point, as we begin to collaborate and we begin to communicate, why can't we? Why can't we look at a fictional situation like a Wakanda the movie and look at it as a real opportunity for us as a people to collaborate because we're spread all over the world, however we got there. So this is Mike Haney. You're watching 60 Minutes in Black America. Next week, we have a very, very, very compelling show as we bring on Dr. J. Keith Motley, the former chancellor of the University of Massachusetts, Boston, to have a compelling conversation about his life and legacy and, above all, education in our community. So join us next week on 60 Minutes in Black America, and we'd like to take you out with this phenomenal tape of these kids from this orphanage singing to you, our people, our African American people, about the richness of our culture, which is originated from our continent, which is Africa. Good night, and have a great week.